Welcome back to Impact Analysis. Each week we break down real-world risks leaders must understand, not just what's happening, but what it really means for operations, infrastructure, and enterprise continuity. My name is Jerome Ryan. I'm joined by my co-host, Mike Janko. Mike, what are we discussing this week?
Hello, Jerome and everyone. This week we're revisiting tariffs. The recent Supreme Court ruling is limiting the administration's interpreted authority over the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. That's what we heard about the IEEPA. At the same time, we have tariff exposure continuing to expand. And today, about 20% of global merchandise imports are all impacted by tariffs or trade restrictive measures. That represents somewhere between $2.6 and $2.9 trillion in trade. Now, this isn't limited to a handful of countries. Over 170 countries and customs territories operate under different tariff regimes. So over 70 countries have implemented new or expanding trade restrictions in the recent years.
Yeah, and our discussions around tariffs are no longer episodic, right? They're structured, and they now sit at the intersection of geopolitics, economics, and constitutional law, as we've seen very recently here. So this is really an evolving situation. And so for our viewers, please understand that the tariffs and related impacts we may be discussing today could change between the moment we're recording and when we're able to upload this video to YouTube. So take that as a short caveat. So let's jump in and break down what's happening.
Not only what changed, but why it matters, Jerome. So what began with the IEEPA in February last year was the U.S. taxing goods from China, Mexico, and Canada, saying that fentanyl trafficking constituted an emergency. So this was followed by Liberation Day, a few months later, adding tax levies for about 10 to 50% on goods from almost every country in the world. And that was claimed to be due to extraordinary and unusual threats. Now, some of these tariffs were not emergency focused. There were some on steel, aluminum, automotive, and lumber, and they were referenced with that Trade Expansion Act of 1962. But a lot of these tariff authorities rely on executive interpretations under these statutes. And historically, the courts have deferred to those interpretations, but not anymore. Now, agencies have to meet a higher standard of clarity. And as soon as the Supreme Court ruled last week, the president responded with a global 10% tariff. And the Treasury Secretary also claims that the new tariffs will, like for like, replace what was affected by the Supreme Court's ruling.
Yeah, Mike, and I think things have even changed since that point. I believe, if the latest news is correct, that we've moved from a global 10% tariff up to a global 15% tariff. So again, by the time this video gets posted, we could be in a different territory altogether. But what's at stake right now is $130 billion in tariff revenue has already been collected. And we need to now unravel what does the recent Supreme Court decision mean for that revenue that's been collected by companies? Does it get refunded to the end purchaser? Does the federal government just refund it to the company? So we have really two, simultaneous forces, right, that are happening right now. First, we've got this expanding global trade restrictions, right? Aside from what's happening with the refund of the tariff money that's been collected, again, global trade restrictions are being put in place and ratcheted up over time. And second, we have a legal scrutiny is tightening around how tariffs are imposed, what the limitations of authority are across the different branches of government, at least here in the United States.
As we continue to talk about global scale, let's look at exposure. Between 2024 and 2025 alone, the new import restrictions affected about $2.7 trillion in global trade. It accounts for about 1/5 of the whole world's imports, with tariffs, quotas, export controls, and other retaliatory measures. So these tariffs worldwide now impact about $1 trillion in goods, particularly across the US, China, EU, and major emerging markets. So this level of exposure affects not only your pricing, it affects supply chain and capital allocations decisions for all of us.
Yeah, that's right. And since the Trump administration returned to office and looking into the future, we may see a continuation of the same administration type policies under potentially a Rubio or a J.D. Vance administration. Business leaders should start to scenario play out for possible expansion or at least maintenance of current tariff measures. So some of the public proposals that have been included that we currently are looking at from the administration is that baseline universal tariff that has recently been imposed at 10% and then quickly expanded to 15%. These types of measures could really impact, again, 60 or more trading partner countries, depending on the structure and scope of how these things get finalized over time. So, these tariffs are being used to expand our national security authority. I believe it's Section 232 is also possible, potentially extending into sectors such as critical minerals, semiconductors, pharmaceutical, energy infrastructure, really looking to, at least in the Trump administration's eyes, protecting a lot of those critical industrial components that are important from a national security perspective to the country. However, any aggressive expansion would likely face immediate legal challenge under the court's revised scrutiny of the framework. It's fluid. We will likely see more legal challenges if additional tariffs are implemented. So this all introduces something new. Political durability risks. Tariffs could be implemented, rescinded, litigated, paused, expanded. Things are going to be in flux for the near term.
And we know leaders should be looking at the systemic impact of all this, right, Jerome? So from an operational standpoint, volatility is a core risk now. So we have cost volatility, we have legal volatility, and geopolitical volatility. So 20% of globally traded products now sit with tariff-impacted categories. So companies operating across the US, China, Germany, Mexico, India, they all have these layered tariffs that are impacting them. So some of the exposures that everyone has now are unpredictability of cost, the risk of your suppliers, your instability of contracts, impact on working capital, and then there's also retaliatory losses, perhaps. So tariffs have no longer become procurement issues. They're now ratcheting up to a top enterprise risk.
Yeah, that's right, Mike. You tariff me, I'm going to tariff you right back, and then we get into the war of words.
And we'll scale back a little bit, but it's still there, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. So, this could expand outward from the tariffs that you've just been talking about here. We could look at things in other fields, to watch out for, like carbon and climate tariffs. I don't think those have been discussed right now, but we could see potential expansion outward in areas around environmental trade mechanisms, where Europe is leading in this space with a lot of the compliance markets. The United States could see that as a threat and respond accordingly. We just need to make sure that we are looking at not just the tariffs in the industries that are in the focus today, but what could happen if we focus outward or expand from this point? So I think maybe at this point we segue and talk a little bit more specifically around the executives and the leaders that are watching this video. What should they be considering now with these tariffs and the Supreme Court's recent decision? Well, let me kick off here. I think the first thing that I'm thinking of is tariffs are no longer isolated trade tools. They now sit at the intersection of geopolitics, industrial policy, and constitutional law. So it's really broad looking. And Mike, I think this might be a good time for us to talk a little bit about what key takeaways leaders should be considering right now. I think leaders should be looking to conduct a full tariff and legal exposure audit, really assess the direct and the embedded tariff costs across all the SKUs, the supplier components, any of those different supplier tiers. They should really have an understanding around the exposure.
Great point, Jerome. And I think the next step should be our leaders and their teams should be looking at three different scenarios. Are the tariffs going to stay where they are? Are they frozen? Are they going to escalate to certain points? Or are they going to focus on targeted sectors and expand on them?
That's right. And third, I'd say map country of origin dependencies beyond tier one suppliers. Start to really look into the tier two, the tier three suppliers, and that entire supply chain, not just the ones that you immediately touch, but those fourth and fifth parties. Many tariff risks can be hidden within those.
I think a fourth one, Jerome, would be having pricing flexibility built into your products. We know this is quite volatile, so prepare for a 10 to 20% swing in your different categories of your products as well.
Yeah, and maybe, fifth, monitor litigation developments. We know that they're probably going to happen. We should have an understanding of what's being discussed and what might percolate through the legal system here in the United States.
And finally, in the past, we've looked at materials like this as a procurement issue. We need to elevate tariff strategy to a board level risk review and make sure it's top of mind when we do have our board level discussions.
Excellent point. So there you have it. Tariffs are no longer isolated trade tools. They're now at the intersection of geopolitics, industrial policy, constitutional law.
And I think by taking these steps, we're going to be proactive and make sure we're addressing one of our new top operational risks. So we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you next time on Impact Analysis.
Thank you.